Right. Before we dive into today's absolutely mind-blowing journey through agricultural history, and trust me, this story is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about food security and corporate control. I need you to do me a massive favor. First, smash that like button because it genuinely helps more than you know. Second, hit subscribe if you haven't already, because we're constantly putting out content that'll expose the hidden truths behind our food system. And third, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I'm Martin, currently enjoying the absolutely gorgeous summer weather here in Cape Town, South Africa, where I'm hiding out until February to escape the brutal German winter. Honestly, while you're probably dealing with snow and freezing temperatures, I'm sitting here with a view of Table Mountain, thinking about a crop that could solve world hunger but was deliberately erased because it was too successful. Now, let's talk about something that's going to absolutely blow your mind. A crop that breaks every rule of modern farming, yields double what potatoes can produce, survives cold that kills wheat, and once you plant it, you never have to buy seed again because it replants itself forever. For thousands of years, it was the ultimate insurance against famine. Then we erased it. Not because it failed, because it was too successful. The story begins in 1605 along the eastern shores of North America. French explorer Samuel de Champlain lands on what would become the Massachusetts coast, and the Algonquin people welcome him with a feast. Among the dishes is a knobby root they call Kaishuk Panak, the sun root. Champlain tastes it and writes in his journal that it rivals the artichoke of Europe. He fills the hold of his ship with tubers and sails back to France, unknowingly carrying what would become one of Europe's most important survival foods. But here's what Champlain didn't understand. He wasn't just discovering a new vegetable. He was encountering a crop that represented thousands of years of indigenous agricultural wisdom. The Iroquois told a creation story about this plant. When Earth Woman died, giving birth to twin sons, Sapling and Flint, the first Sunchokes grew from her feet. A crop born from sacrifice, designed to sustain life. This plant, Helianthus tuberosus, topinambur, the perennial sunflower root, towers 8 to 10 feet tall, crowned with yellow sunflowers that follow the sun. But the real treasure is invisible, buried beneath the soil. Knobby tubers in white, purple, and gold, storing sweetness as inulin rather than starch. And here's the kicker. Tribes from the Atlantic to the Great Plains planted it once and harvested forever. In 1805, Lewis and Clark nearly starved crossing the Dakotas. They were saved by Sacagawea, who found mouse caches, thousands of sunchokes that prairie mice had gathered underground for winter. She dug them up, roasted them over fire, and fed the expedition. The tubers could be eaten raw, crisp like water chestnuts, or boiled until soft. They could be dried into flour that lasted through winter. They survived freezing, waiting in the ground, ready whenever hunger came. Now here's where the numbers get absolutely staggering. A single sunchoke plant produces 3 to 6 pounds of tubers. An acre yields 64,000 pounds without a single drop of irrigation. Compare that to potatoes, which even in perfect conditions with irrigation yield 53,000 pounds per acre. This wasn't just survival food. This was agricultural superiority that modern farming still can't match. When Champlain carried sunchokes to France in 1605, Europe was starving. Soils were exhausted. Famines struck every few years, and the potato was still feared because people believed it caused leprosy. But the sunchoke spread like salvation. The French called it topinambur. The Italians called it girasole, sunflower. It fed peasants, livestock, even kings. No fertilizer, no care. Plant a tuber in spring, harvest in fall. Leave fragments in the ground, and next year a full crop appears on its own. University trials centuries later would confirm what farmers knew. Sunchokes produced 30,000 calories per acre compared to potatoes' 20,000. They rivaled corn, the world's most important grain, but with zero annual inputs. This was agricultural perfection, and it terrified the emerging industrial food system. But cracks appeared in this perfect crop. The tubers were small, knobby, and irregular, difficult to clean and impossible to harvest by machine. They spoiled faster than potatoes and couldn't sit in warehouses for months. and the inulin caused gas in people unused to it. By the mid-1700s, the potato won. Larger, smoother, easier to store, it fit the systems Europe had built. Warehouses, markets, tax collectors. The sunchoke fell, reduced to food for the poor and animal feed. In North America, settlers called it a weed. They preferred European crops, wheat and potatoes. Crops that required buying seed every year. Crops that could be controlled, taxed, and sold. The sunchoke survived in ditches, roadsides, forgotten corners. But it was no longer cultivated, no longer valued, just waiting. Then, war came. World War I brought the German blockade and the turnip winter of 1916. People ate rutabagas meant for livestock because potatoes had failed. Thousands died. Sunchokes saved some, growing wild in forgotten fields. They couldn't be blockaded, couldn't be seized. They were just there, underground, waiting for desperate hands. But World War II was worse. In France in 1940, Nazi forces seized 80% of all food. Potatoes went to German soldiers. What was left for French families was scraps, sunchokes, rutabagas, vegetables once fed to pigs. For 5 years, millions survived on topinambour. People despised it. The tubers were small and hard to clean. Eaten every day, they caused terrible gas. Still, they kept children alive when everything else was gone. The Nazi hunger plan seized food from occupied lands while millions starved. But sunchokes couldn't be controlled. They were too hardy, too wild. They just grew. In the Netherlands, the winter of 1944 became the hunger winter. 22,000 people died of starvation. The government published emergency cookbooks listing wild plants, tulip bulbs, and sunchokes. Families dug frozen ground with bare hands looking for tubers. After liberation, survivors refused to eat them. An entire generation associated topinambour with death, occupation, the worst years humanity had seen. In France, grandparents who survived wouldn't allow it on their tables. Never again. The vegetable that saved millions became a symbol of suffering. It disappeared from markets, cookbooks, memory. But war couldn't change what sunchokes were nutritionally. 73 calories per 100 grams, 2 grams of protein, 429 milliliters of potassium, more than bananas. Iron, copper, magnesium, B vitamins flooding every cell. The real power is inulin, 50 to 60% by weight, one of Earth's richest sources. Here's where the science gets fascinating. Inulin passes through your stomach undigested and reaches your colon intact. Beneficial bacteria, especially Bifidobacterium, feast on it. They multiply and produce short-chain fatty acids that lower pH, block pathogens, and help absorb calcium and magnesium that would otherwise pass through. Studies show it reduces constipation and boosts immune function. It may stop certain cancers before they start. Potatoes spike blood sugar. Sunchokes don't. The inulin converts to fructose slowly. Diabetics in the 1980s wrote letters saying they ate sunchokes daily and their insulin needs dropped by half. Folk medicine validated by science. And the plant heals land. It's perennial, requiring no tilling and causing no erosion. Its deep roots crack compacted soil. It tolerates drought, poor dirt, and cold to -30 degrees C. Where annual crops die, sunchokes thrive. They were designed for chaos. In the 1960s in California, produce wholesaler Frida Kaplan stared at knobby tubers gathering dust. The name was killing it. Jerusalem artichoke. Confusing and wrong. It wasn't from Jerusalem and wasn't an artichoke. The Italian word girasole, meaning sunflower, had been corrupted by English tongues. She renamed it Sunchoke and trademarked the name in 1980. She packaged it in 1-pound bags with recipes. Sales jumped 600%. Chefs discovered it. Nutty, sweet, crisp when raw, creamy when cooked. High-end restaurants served sunchoke soup, roasted sides, purees. But something bigger was happening. In the 1980s, the farm crisis hit, and Midwest farmers were collapsing. An experiment began. grows sunchokes for food, feed, fuel, and independence from corporate supply chains. High yields, perennial, ethanol from inulin fermentation. Perfect. It failed economically. No market, no processing infrastructure. Farmers lost money. But the idea survived. A crop for self-sufficiency, for communities that refuse corporate control. Today, scientists study them for marginal lands. Where climate change kills wheat and corn, the sunchoke waits. Born in chaos, built for extremes. Resilience incarnate. And the inulin problem. What makes them nutritionally superior also causes gas. The gut bacteria need time to adapt. But modern food doesn't tolerate adaptation periods. It demands instant satisfaction. The nickname spread, Fartichoke. A joke. Even Julia Child wrote asking, "Can you fix the flatulence problem?" Yes, cook longer. Heat converts inulin to fructose. Or eat small amounts. Let your body adjust. But that requires patience. Industrial food has none. So sunchokes stay niche. Farmers markets, specialty crops, home gardens where they spread uncontrollably. That uncontrollable spread is the point. You cannot kill sunchokes without poison. Any fragment sprouts. In Europe, they're called invasive when they escape. Invasive, the word we use for things that succeed without permission. Things that don't need us. Things that remind us control is an illusion. The sunchoke outyields potatoes, heals dead soil, feeds communities without middlemen. It cannot be patented, cannot be owned, cannot generate perpetual revenue. So it's called primitive, difficult, unsuitable. The pattern repeats. Amaranth was banned by conquistadors for being too sacred. Perennial beans were erased by machines that couldn't handle their freedom. Mesquite was cleared for cattle that destroyed what the tree protected. Feverfew beans were replaced by pills that charge $500 for what grows free in gardens. Climate change is coming. Droughts, floods, heat. The crops feeding 8 billion people were bred for stability. That stability is ending. The sunchoke was born in chaos. It stores energy where drought cannot reach. It survives cold that kills potatoes. It outproduces corn using 1/3 the water. When industrial systems fail, the sunchoke will be ready. It has been ready for 4 centuries. French families survived occupation eating topinambour they hated. Dutch mothers dug frozen ground for tubers to feed starving children. Native Americans called it Kaishuk Panak, sunroot. A gift from Earthwoman's sacrifice. Names change, memory fades. But the plant never left. Perennial, underground, waiting for hands willing to dig. We didn't lose the sunchoke. We just forgot it. But forgetting isn't final. The knowledge lives in the soil. In every wild patch, in every escaped tuber. In every gardener who plants 3 and harvests 30. This crop teaches through persistence, through refusal to die. Abundance was always here, growing in the dirt, free. But here's the beautiful thing. The sunchoke doesn't care about corporate agriculture's plans. It's still out there, still growing, still waiting. Every abandoned lot, every roadside ditch, every forgotten corner of farmland might be hiding this miracle crop. And once you plant it, once you taste it, once you understand what it represents, you become part of the resistance against a food system designed to keep you hungry and dependent. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm genuinely curious about our global audience. And if this story about the forgotten crop that could feed the world has opened your eyes to the madness of our modern food system, give us a like because it really helps us keep making content that reveals the truths they don't want you to know.